On the buzz meter this Sunday, President Trump trying to sack the NFL and slam dunk the NBA, disinviting Golden State Warriors star Steph Curry from a White House visit, and calling on football owners to dump protesting players like Colin Kaepernick.
Wouldn't you love to see one of these NFL owners, when somebody disrespects our flag, to say, get that son of a bitch off the field right now, out, he's fired. He's fired!
With the likes of NFL boss Roger Goodell and basketball star LeBron James punching back, are the media rooting against the president? A gusher of leaks from the special counsel's office targets Trump and his former campaign manager, producing a cascade of negative stories, especially after the disclosure that federal authorities wiretapped Paul Manafort.
So Donald Trump's, if I could, argument that he was being wiretapped, which was so loudly mocked and ridiculed, now appears to be absolutely true.
It's just wrong. Paul Manafort being wiretapped and Donald Trump being wiretapped on orders by Barack Obama are not the same thing.
President Trump is vindicated, and the liberal mainstream media, they have been caught in a major lie and even a bigger cover-up.
This does not vindicate the president for saying that President Obama had wiretapped him.
Mr. Manafort may well have done something wrong. He may not have, but he's clearly a target in a way that nobody else in the Starr investigation was, except Bill Clinton.
I do think that Paul Manafort is staring down the barrel of a gun.
Is Robert Mueller subjecting Manafort to trial by media? As the president keeps attacking North Korea's leader on Twitter after denouncing him at the UN, the press rocketing into a debate over his tough language. Are the pundits picking ideological sides in this nuclear crisis? Plus, an MSNBC host gets very angry when things go wrong.
There's insanity in the control room tonight. You have insanity in my earpiece. Stop the hammering. Stop the hammering out there. Who's got a hammer? Where is it? Where's the hammer?
A look at why Lawrence O'Donnell apologized. I'm Howard Kurtz, and this is Media Buzz. Major sports figures have been hitting back hard against the president's criticism of the NFL and the NBA. Football Commissioner Roger Goodell says divisive comments like these demonstrate an unfortunate lack of respect for the NFL, our great game, and all of our players. But Trump tweeted, if a player wants the privilege of making millions of dollars in the NFL or other leagues, he or she should not be allowed to disrespect our great American flag or country and should stand for the national anthem. If not, you're fired. Cleveland's LeBron James was less diplomatic in defending his NBA rival Steph Curry, addressing the president on Twitter as "you bum." Joining us now to analyze the coverage, Molly Hemingway, senior editor at The Federalist. Joe Trippi, the Democratic strategist, both are Fox News contributors. And Erin McPike, White House correspondent for Independent Journal Review. Molly, feels like we're in the first quarter here. Are the media cheering for Steph Curry, for Colin Kaepernick, the out-of-work quarterback who was the first last year to not stand for the national anthem, against the president?
Right. This is absolutely a newsworthy story. Anytime the president weighs in on a hot-button cultural topic, it deserves to be covered. But how it's covered is very important, too. And I think there's a large disconnect between many people in newsrooms and the average American, or many average Americans, who have been frustrated with some of these protests, who see in this a disrespect for the flag. There's quite a bit of disagreement about whether you're disrespecting the flag in this case. So it's important to make sure that the context is provided as well. And yeah, it seems pretty clear that the media are all in on one side of this.
Joe, no secret the media narrative is the president loves picking fights with people, but usually it's other pals or pundits. And perhaps he'd rather be talking about this than the fact that the health care bill is hanging by a thread. But is this different because he's taking on athletes, many of whom, like LeBron, have their own followings?
Absolutely, but look, the media is doing exactly what the president wants.
Taking the bait, you suggest?
Taking the bait, yeah, exactly. And I think, but the other thing I think the point is that you're making or asking about is correct. These, LeBron James is not Rand Paul or some of the other politicians he's picked fights with.
LeBron made a video, and his tweets are getting zillions of retweets.
And so that's going to get more media coverage as well. Again, probably playing right into what the president wants to have.
Is this boffo at the box office because it combines Donald Trump, politics, sports, and race?
It may be, but look, I actually want to read a comment that Steph Curry
made just yesterday. He's becoming a folk hero. He wasn't even setting out to be one, but he put this in a really calm light. He said, I don't know why he feels the need to target certain individuals rather than others. I have an idea of why, but it's kind of beneath the leader of a country to go that route. It's not what leaders do. Which was a great comment by Steph Curry. And if the media is rooting for a comment like that, it kind of makes sense because he is doing something and saying something that Donald Trump is not. He is showing more leadership, frankly, than Donald Trump has.
Well, one of the things here is that this is so tailor-made for the media. Joe, you say taking the bait because you have sports talk radio. You have local media in every market talking about their teams. For example, Robert Kraft, owner of the New England Patriots, friend of Trump, just put out a statement saying he's disappointed. And just about 90 minutes ago, let's put it up, an NFL game began in London, Jacksonville versus Baltimore. Whole lot of players either kneeling or locking arms during the playing of the national anthem. So with the president, Molly, now saying perhaps fans should not go to games if the NFL doesn't take action against these protesting players, this is going to 11.
Oh, it's definitely going to 11. And part of the thing, I think, is that we need to see this as the president picking up on some sentiment that's already out there and picking the terms that are most favorable for him. Right now, you are on one side of the debate, which is respect for the flag, respect for the national anthem, or you actually have to position yourself against those things. These are actually complicated topics. Freedom of speech is a complicated topic. Pressure for firing is a complicated topic. And we're not, I mean, I just hope that when the media are covering these things that they understand to delve deeply into those instead of having these surface discussions.
Now you have anybody like Stevie Wonder did it. Taking a knee has become the sort of shorthand for resistance to the Trump presidency, and every time a celebrity does it, doesn't even have to be an athlete anymore. That is going to get coverage. But what do you think?
We don't have a set that lets do that.
Oh, you ready to go down on one knee? We'll get a picture of you afterwards. What do you make of Molly's point that there's a disconnect here between a large swath of the country that feels like these are over-entitled, overpaid, privileged athletes who nevertheless are disrespecting the flag, and the nation's newsrooms where there's more sympathy for peaceful protest?
Well, they are making peaceful protest, and they're protesting on behalf of people they believe don't have a voice, particularly when the President of the United States has the big voice that he has and is riling up and in a lot of ways playing to his base at the expense of the people these people are kneeling for.
Just briefly.
Look, I think people are starting to say, look, these players aren't patriotic. They're disrespecting the national anthem and the flag. They have a moment and a microphone to make a statement. And look, in all of these professional sports games, there is always a moment where teams actually pay tribute to service members. That's separate from the national anthem. But these players see that there is racism going on in this country, and they think that the president is racist.
So
they're actually making a patriotic moment,
so you
I think.
Much more sympathetic to the protesters than the president on this.
Yes, I'll admit it.
I also don't think there's a tradition of this. I mean, John Carlos and Tommy Smith at the 1968 Olympics,
what is missed?
made a
right.
What's missed from this is people see these protests against them. They don't see it against Donald Trump. They see it against them, their service in the military, their flag. These symbols are important, and we need to have that be part of the conversation.
We're going to come back to this a little later in the program, but let me turn to the special counsel's investigation, Paul Manafort. These leaks that Manafort has been told that he will be indicted, also that he had been wiretapped, and the question is, was the president's voice picked up on these wiretaps? Leaking to the New York Times and CNN in a criminal investigation, that's kind of stunning, this level of detail that's being leaked.
Yeah, we're a year into all of this Russia hysteria, and still the only crimes we know of are the criminal leaks of details of FISA investigations. And here we have yet another one learning about Paul Manafort. And it does speak to whether this story has been well covered. We have had this general media approach that there is collusion, that the Trump team are traitorous and that they were working with Russia to steal an election, when all the evidence seems to not support that, so much as support that there might have been some untoward spying on political opponents by an outgoing administration that was in opposition to
Well, the first Manafort wiretap goes back to 2014, so this could possibly have to do with questionable business dealings that don't have anything to do with Donald Trump. We don't know the answer to that. There's no question Mueller is pressuring Manafort. But what about this whole, we played some sound earlier, Joe, well, this vindicates, some say, President Trump saying Barack Obama wiretapped him at Trump Tower, and others are saying, no, that's not what this is. This is a FBI court-approved wiretaps of Paul Manafort and his business dealings.
Well, it goes to the politicization of all this. Defenders of Trump will say it vindicates him. The facts are there's a big difference. Obama didn't order a wiretap of Trump Tower. That's pretty clear. And to Molly's point, though, even these leaks say that they were inconclusive, that there wasn't, they didn't find any discovery in those conversations.
Well, we don't know. The investigation's ongoing.
But that was the reporting was that there was no there, or it wasn't at least confirmed that there was a there.
I'm just so struck, Aaron, by the way, pundits on both sides have jumped to conclusions when the fact is we don't know a lot about the origin of those wiretaps, what was picked up, and even whether Donald Trump's voice was picked up incidentally.
Right. We don't know either way. The one thing that I do think is interesting is that you are seeing White House lawyers starting to talk to reporters, trying to distance Donald Trump and the White House from Manafort, which suggests that they know something's coming.
All right, let me get now to, sorry, cut you off. Let me get to President Trump versus the leader of North Korea, a guy he's now calling, in the latest tweet, Little Rocket Man, and saying if his foreign minister backs up Kim Jong-un's position, they won't be around much longer. Here's some of the media reaction to the president's original UN speech and afterward.
The words totally destroying a nation of 25 million people, that borders on the threat of committing a war crime.
It is certainly an unusual speech, a weird speech, Rocket Man, insulting Kim Jong-un.
I think that North Korea is one of those situations where the president is showing a steady hand.
Two of the most unpredictable leaders on the planet, trading insults like a pair of middle schoolers.
Molly, many liberal pundits slamming the president for his threatening language against Kim, but Barack Obama also said we have the ability to annihilate North Korea.
Well, not just that, but once again, you have a bunch of people coming out in the media saying that it's bad to insult someone who runs slavery camps and has sex slaves and is a total violator of human rights. This is not a position you really want to be in if you want to have thoughtful criticism of the president. But it's also true that they're not understanding that there's a cohesive strategy here between the State Department's more diplomatic approach and using the rhetoric of the president to kind of amp up the heat against China so that they do more here too.
Now, many conservative pundits are rooting for the president, saying this was one of the greatest speeches at the UN ever. But when Molly says cohesive strategy, the coverage has suggested that at least part of this is Trump's personal pique, the way he loves to insult. And in this case, he's insulting and going at a guy who has nuclear weapons, but also is putting on threatening nuclear tests, including the hydrogen bomb test.
And in this case, you have two of those kinds of leaders, and the coverage of that is amping up the heat on this issue. I think in the end, the coverage has to get more to what's the end game. I mean, in other words, where is all this going? If there's a concerted strategy here, what's the end game to get there? And you don't see much coverage of that.
Aaron, I got half a minute. So some of the coverage was fair. The New York Times said it was a confrontational speech at the UN with bombastic flourishes. That is true. But is another case of the press not quite knowing how to handle a president who doesn't speak in the careful way his predecessors did.
Well, they don't, but I would also point out that there are some stories that noted that there were people in the White House staff who didn't want President Trump to make some of those remarks in his speech. And we obviously saw some of the pictures of John Kelly not particularly liking some of the comments in his speech.
Well, he looked like he was dismayed. We don't know what he was. We needed the thought bubble to know what he was thinking. Let me get a break. MediaBuzz@foxnews.com. You want to write to us, weigh in here. When we come back, a very tough week for Sean Spicer. Is the press piling on? And later, Jimmy Kimmel plunges into the healthcare debate. Is that risky business for a comedian? The media pile-on against Sean Spicer has been extraordinary in the last few days, ever since the former press secretary did that brief bit at the Emmys.
This will be the largest audience to witness an Emmys, period, both in person and around the world.
The pundits piled on, saying he was celebrating a moment when he lied about the president's inaugural crowd size.
The good news is Sean Spicer doesn't have to lie for a living anymore. Now he just seems to be doing it recreationally.
And Good Morning America grilled him in a confrontational interview.
Have you ever lied to the American people? I don't think so.
Did the president ever ask you to lie or to manipulate the truth? No. Do you think you have a credibility issue, Sean?
I don't, but it's up to other people to judge that.
And there were more questions like that. Sean Spicer made mistakes at the White House, as he readily admits. But Molly, what explains this extraordinary amount of media abuse, perhaps media payback against the former spokesman?
Right. It seems like the idea is that because this man worked for Donald Trump, he must be treated as a pariah. And it seems like this standard is not universally applied. You know, the previous administration droned an American citizen and his innocent child without due process. Do we say that none of those people who worked for that administration can be out in public life? Or when they pushed forth a claim that if you liked your health care plan, you could keep it? Nobody says that these are discrediting statements. Everyone acts like press secretary is a new job that just arrived with Donald Trump, when in fact this is the role that press secretaries have played throughout time.
Well, Spicer told me in an interview that the Emmys thing was he was just trying to poke a little fun at himself, be self-deprecating. There's no rehabilitation toward, no deeper meaning to it. But he said, look, no matter what I do now, haters are going to hate. So, Joe, is there a double standard? I mean, he was out there, difficult job, Donald Trump's spokesman. He didn't always personally endorse the things that the president had said, like millions of people voted illegally in the election. And now NBC reports that no network plans to hire him as a commentator.
I don't know why no network wants him, but I think, look, he
I mean, you're a political guy who now does punditry.
Yeah. So I'm still surprised. But anyway, no, but I mean, I think that part of this is he did come onto the stage, I mean, very beginning with what has to be, even that clip, one of the biggest sort of people just sort of were aghast at, like, how he could put a false statement like that out there, and he kept defending it.
Well, and he attacked the media on his very first full day in office and didn't take any questions, and that set a tone.
Now he's trying to rehabilitate himself, and yeah, he's going to get shots taken at him. I mean, that's just the way it's going to be.
Aaron.
I do think it's a little bit too much, and he was in an impossible position, unfortunately, I think, with President Trump. That very first day was obviously terrible. I'm sure the guy was terrified, and it's too bad that he is getting mocked as badly as he is.
Now, Spicer did make it worse with a threat against the veteran reporter Mike Allen of Axios, who had texted him a question, and Spicer wrote back, "Stop texting or emailing, or I will report to appropriate authorities." Now, look, Spicer lost his cool. He made a mistake there, and he apologized. But that fuels the notion that...
Yeah, he was obviously trying to get Mike off his back. He didn't want to have to deal with this anymore. That was probably not quite the right thing to text back, because then it wound up at the top of Mike's morning note, and everybody read it.
Right, but by the way, he was being asked of a very speculative story that Mueller might want a bunch of notebooks that he kept in the White House and at the RNC. He might not. But coming back to your point about, you know, the job press secretary is not new. That interview on GMA, I have never seen an interview 1/10 as aggressive involving any of Obama's guys, Robert Gibbs, Jay Carney, Josh Earnest, and they were all snatched up by networks after their tenure.
Yeah, I also saw a Washington Post story say that because Sean Spicer said he represented the president, he was essentially admitting that he lied for the president, which is not an accurate thing at all to say. We have currently George Stephanopoulos, who worked for the Clinton administration, supported the Clinton Foundation while interviewing Hillary Clinton, and nobody really cares about these things. You have to be consistent. If it's true that you can't have any role with the media after you're a press secretary, or if you're doing your job means that you can't be trusted, you need to apply that consistently.
There's something different about Spicer, because the networks have all picked up Trump people, all of them.
Well, there aren't that many yet.
No, but I mean, they picked them up.
But isn't it because he did attack the media, and the media can handle anything other than an attack on themselves?
That may be it, but that's what I'm trying to say is there's something that makes him different in the way he's getting handled.
On that note, Joe Trippi, Aaron McPike, Molly, we'll see you in a little bit. Ahead, will Facebook sell advertising to anyone, from neo-Nazis to Russian propaganda artists? But up next, the Jimmy Kimmel test in healthcare, and why that Lawrence O'Donnell meltdown on NBC is going viral. The Senate health care bill hanging by a thread, one of the major players, Jimmy Kimmel, the ABC talk show host, whose infant son underwent open heart surgery and needs more operations, engaged in a nightly denunciation of Trump's effort and the bill's Republican co-sponsor, Senator Bill Cassidy.
And this guy, Bill Cassidy, just lied right to my face. Do you believe that every American, regardless of income, should be able to get regular checkups, maternity care, et cetera, all of those things that people who have health care get and need?
Yep.
So yep is Washington for nope, I guess.
Joining us now from New York on this and other television topics, Shelby Holliday, video reporter for the Wall Street Journal. And Shelby, Jimmy Kimmel, obviously, it's personal and passionate for him, but he's a big Trump critic. He's fighting and debating a Republican senator. We now know he consulted with Chuck Schumer. Could that turn off viewers, some viewers who just want entertainment in late night?
Well, some viewers are certainly annoyed, and they have criticized Kimmel for speaking out on an issue that they say he shouldn't be talking about. He's not an expert on health care. Kimmel, on the other hand, has said, you know, my son was born with a pre-existing condition, and I have a duty to speak up. So there is a hot debate about whether or not he should even be discussing it. But what Kimmel has done is really take this big debate about health care and the Affordable Care Act and personalize it and focus on one issue. It's an important issue, but all we're talking about is pre-existing conditions because of Jimmy Kimmel. And that's really frustrated Republicans. Lindsey Graham visibly frustrated the other day because they want to talk about what Obamacare is doing to small businesses,
right,
how it's hurting a lot of Americans.
And this bill would create 50 separately regulated markets. It's more complicated than just that.
It's
but
very complicated,
let me go on to this.
Kimmel's made it all about this one thing.
Right, okay, but you know, the Jimmy Kimmel test and so forth, does this suggest that we're in a new era now? Maybe this was inspired by Jon Stewart, where comics have to be socially relevant and in most cases, especially on late night, liberal.
Yeah, and in this case with President Trump, all the comics who have been really critical of Trump have done well in terms of ratings. So they're not just doing it because they personally are liberal and believe these things, but they're also doing it because ratings are going up.
Right.
It's a financial decision.
All right. Now, this tape of MSNBC host Lawrence O'Donnell was leaked to Media Eye. Apparently, it's a rehearsal. Things went wrong. He lost his cool. Let's play a little bit more of that.
Empty out the goddamn control room and find out where this is going on. So now I have to chase those stupid damn entrails that you allowed him to stick out there. Jesus Christ. Crazy sound coming in my ear, this stupid hammering. I told you why I wanted those words cut. It just sucks. It sucks.
Pretty embarrassing stuff.
I think this is a good time to remind people of the golden rule. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. The fact that this was leaked, it's not so surprising to people. If you're working for a man who's cursing like that and freaking out behind the scenes, you may not exactly love the guy. However, he has apologized, and a big issue that this has really shed light on is the fact that his contract negotiations are being drawn out. MSNBC's Primetime has done really well over the past 2 years, but he is negotiating his contract, and that leaves questions to whether or not someone's intentionally leaking this tape.
His contract was dragging out at the time. This was back in August.
At the time,
now it's been resolved. Look, Lawrence
so
O'Donnell
a lot of people are wondering if this is revenge.
Clearly, it's payback by somebody. Lawrence O'Donnell said, I'm sorry, a better anchorman and a better person would have handled it better. I'm not going to pile on here. I've been testy occasionally off camera when things go wrong. I think a lot of people in the business could be vulnerable to this sort of thing, and he thought this was a private moment.
It's true, and it should be a private moment.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, somebody was out to get Lawrence. Finally, tomorrow, Megyn Kelly, my former colleague at Fox, very great television talent, debuts on the third hour of the Today Show. Here's a little bit of the promo showing how they're positioning Megyn. This is something about the things she does that drives her family crazy.
Number one, for sure, I'm late. I'm late for everything. The only thing I am not late for is my show, and that's really because I have no choice.
So Megyn, known as a tough interviewer, but Shelby, how will she do in the morning format, softer, more featurey, with a largely female audience?
It's a big question, and pressure's on for sure, but I will say I caught a clip of her on Ellen last week. She was drinking wine in a sumo wrestler fat suit, and if a woman can, moderate a presidential debate and have some fun with Ellen in a huge fat sumo suit, I think she's set up for success. Chances are pretty good.
Well, having a sense of humor is really important in television, but especially in the morning. Shelby Holliday, thanks very much for joining us.
Thanks,
Great to see you. Coming up, Facebook gets drawn into the Robert Mueller investigation for selling ads to phony Russian front groups. Why can't the social network control its content? Facebook is getting buried under an avalanche of bad press after belatedly agreeing to give Congress what it's already turned over to Robert Mueller. Ads placed by bogus front groups as part of an alleged Russian operation to influence the election. Mark Zuckerberg responded on Facebook Live.
We are committed to rising to the occasion. Our sophistication in handling these threats is growing and improving quickly. We will continue working with the government to understand the full extent of Russian interference.
Joining us now, Shayna Glenzer, a technology analyst here in Washington and in Chicago. Carly Shimkus, reporter for Fox News Headlines 24/7 on Sirius XM. Shayna, how does Facebook justify selling all these ads to these bogus Russian front groups with no vetting? They're mostly pro-Trump, anti-Hillary, and then initially resisting turning this over to Congress.
Yeah, I mean, Facebook has a huge problem here. I mean, it continues to be vulnerable to nefarious uses of its platform that it's not anticipating. You know, in this case, this illegitimate Russian organizations hijacking the use of its really powerful advertising platform. You know, and I can't help but think, you know, this was a company started by a college student looking to meet girls, and they really never put in place the controls to keep these bad actors out, and we're seeing that yet again here.
Yeah, that's the problem. And Carly, this comes just days after the other Facebook problem, which was revelation by an investigation by the media group ProPublica, which spent $30 on ads to show that they are helping neo-Nazi groups target people interested in such topics as Jew haters, how to burn Jews, why Jews ruin the world. Sheryl Sandberg of Facebook said that was a failure.
She said that was a failure, and she also said that they're going to now hire more people to fix the issue. And that is something that they say every time there is an issue.
Exactly.
Here's a suggestion. Don't only rely on machines. It doesn't work. Hire more people. Sometimes the old ways are the best ways, and they haven't figured that out just yet.
Right, and this comes up again and again, Shayna, because Facebook has also published plenty of fake news during the campaign, by which I mean, you know, deliberate lying propaganda by these shadowy groups. And again, well, you know, it's an algorithm, we can't always control it, always sort of playing catch up with the fact that there's a lot of garbage that gets posted on this huge site.
Yeah, there's a lot of garbage. It was a New York Times column this week, and columnists asserted that, you know, Facebook's facing this Frankenstein's monster moment where they've created this, you know, this powerful machine that they have this cheery, optimistic culture that, you know, it's going to be used for good, but it continues to be used by malevolent individuals that are, you know, looking to exploit it.
I'm not buying the Frankenstein analogy, because that suggests that it's just beyond the human capability to control this. What it really is the company's overriding principle has been to make money. And all this stuff that comes in, they're like, oh, we don't really, you know, it's a platform for everybody, and let's just keep the cash registers ringing.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that's why. Go ahead, Carly.
Oh, no, I'm so sorry. Well, I just did want to say something about the money aspect of this whole thing. And one of the reasons why Mark Zuckerberg and Facebook executives may have not been so willing to give or comply with Congress in giving all these ads over to them initially is because the last thing that Facebook wants is government regulation of their ads. Last year, they made $28 billion in almost all exclusively ad revenue alone. So they want as many people to buy as many ads as possible. So the bottom line, the dollar, is the big thing that is coming into play in this instance as well.
It's a great point, Carly, but by repeatedly failing to police and keep stuff out that's either fake, that's Russian propaganda, Facebook is inviting some politicians to say we have to have some government regulation of this giant company. And Shayna, here's the thing. I mean, Mark Zuckerberg has always maintained this fiction, this polite fiction of we're not a media company. We're just a social platform. We provide tools. Everything is decided by algorithms. And it's one of the most powerful media companies on earth. Other media companies trying to get their content on it. And it seems the bottom line is he doesn't take responsibility, or is only starting to take responsibility for the content.
I think you did see him start taking responsibility this week in that video where he looked like a young politician in that video.
Yeah,
I don't know
somebody
if you thought
who
that
might
as well.
want to run for office.
Yeah. But you saw him, you know, do this about face, because it's one thing to justify standing up for users' privacy like you've seen from Apple in the past, but it's another thing to justify, you know, a business case that makes you billions of dollars. And so that was, I think, the first step in trying to placate some of the calls for regulation. And I think you might see more from him in terms of these live videos in the weeks to come.
Right. And Carly, you know, Facebook's whole popularity depends on lots and lots of people feeling comfortable using it. It's become a more polarizing place, reflecting what's going on in American politics. But how much of this is giving Facebook a black eye? I mean, it's at the point now where it's caught up in the Mueller investigation. It's impossible to ignore.
Yeah, it certainly is. But one of the big questions with this whole Mueller investigation and the new Russian-linked ads revelation is, did it actually affect the election? And it doesn't look like it did. Spending $100,000 on 3,000 ads over the course of 2 years actually isn't a whole lot of money, so it looks like the impact was limited. At the same time, there were reports that Russian-linked groups created Facebook invitations to anti-Clinton rallies that people actually went to.
Well,
so you're right, a dark mark.
That's a fair point, but
Facebook
that's all that we actually know about at this point. Carly Shimkus, Shana Glenzer here in D.C., thanks very much for joining us.
Thanks a lot.
I don't think Mark Zuckerberg is going to like this segment. Coming up, more on the president going head-to-head against the NFL and the NBA. A Fox News alert. Pittsburgh Steelers head coach Mike Tomlin telling CBS Sports his team will not participate in the national anthem during today's game in Chicago, will not be on the field. And that sets up our next segment very likely with the president sort of going to war with the NFL and the NBA. Joining us now, Cheryl Chumley, online opinion editor at the Washington Times, and Francesca Chambers, White House correspondent for DailyMail.com. Cheryl, is President Trump tackling a great, incisive issue here about sports and protest and privilege, or is it just giving the media a great bench-clearing brawl?
He's tackling a patriotic issue, which, if you followed Trump on the campaign trail, this is what he was all about: make America great again. America's #1. And insofar as how the media is reporting on it, I think they're forgetting that that's the angle that is really crucial about what the NFL players are doing right now.
The media, many organizations, Francesca, framing this as a racially charged controversy. Huffington Post says Trump goes after black athletes. Sure. Chris Liz of CNN playing with racial animus. Chris Wallace asked on Fox News Sunday why he was opening up racial wounds. Is that the proper framing here, or is it broader than just a racial question?
Well, it's so difficult as a journalist to discuss a lot of these issues when they do touch on racial sensitivities, as you know, Howard, because we're not stenographers. It's our job to put these into context. So you have a president that has a history of making comments on racially sensitive topics. We all remember Charlottesville and the white supremacists, very fine people on both sides. Then when it comes to the black football players who are kneeling, he called them a word that we won't be able to say on this show.
Oh, SOB.
Sure, SOB. And so as journalists, you have to decide which context to put it in. But I want to say, in response to what you're saying, that it is, the White House was on several television shows this morning saying that this is just about patriotism. This is just about the American flag. And it's really important to include that context as well of what the president and the White House think this is about.
Right, but many journalists may not see it that way. But the president is clearly tapping into resentment among a lot of sports fans and others toward these multi-million-dollar athletes who they think should be playing instead of protesting.
Well, I just want to take a little bit of disagreement with what you said. First off, I think it is fairly simple for journalists to look at this issue in a light that isn't covering it just from the day-to-day rapid reaction. First off, Trump didn't call anyone an SOB. He came out and said, what if the coaches called these players SOBs? And I think that...
It's a fine distinction, I
think. It is a fine distinction, but it's the difference between truth and not truth. And I think as journalists, we are in the business of reporting truth as we see it down the line. And as far as what journalists can do to flush out this issue a bit, you know, we could all go back and put this in a better context. We could look way back at the Ferguson protests where the old hands up, don't shoot movement came from, which was based largely on a lie that led to NFL players putting their hands up and saying don't shoot on the field. And from there sprung the whole Black Lives Matter movement.
It was a lie perpetuated by the media, but let me get you back in here.
I was just going to say, it is our responsibility as journalists, though, to show all of the sides on an issue and explain all of the voices. You have the president who has said that this is about the flag, this is about disrespect for our military and the flag. Then you also have the protesters who are saying that's not, or the players who are saying these protests, they're not trying to disrespect the flag. They're not trying to disrespect veterans.
Right.
They believe
That's
this
the
is
debate.
about racial
but
insensitivity.
let me throw this at you, because in the case of Steph Curry of the Golden State Warriors, he said he wasn't sure he wanted to go to the White House for the typical championship visit, and the president was answering back to him. In the case of ESPN's Jamel Hill, she called the president a white supremacist and other things, and he responded. So the president is not always throwing the first punch here.
And that's another comment that the White House made today, is that it was Steph Curry who started this debate, who started this discussion, but then that morphs into a conversation about whether or not it is appropriate for the President of the United States to, or the White House for that matter, to be saying these are fireable offenses, or to be saying that people should be fired or suspended in private
Very
businesses.
briefly, is this about